Hey, it's Nancy. Before we begin today, I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Crime Beat early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Over the years, countless cold case investigators have looked into the murders of Melissa Rahorick and Barbara McLean, who were found dead outside of Calgary in 1976 and 1977. Police have revisited each crime scene and reviewed every file down to the most minute details. Every time, they hope to find something that would be a catalyst to push the investigation forward. But every time, they came up empty-handed, and the killer remained on the loose. Then finally, in 2003, more than 26 years after they were killed, that changed. But it wasn't fresh evidence that would lead to a break in the case. It was an advancement in science.
In 2003, the DNA samples that were recovered from Melissa and Barbara were tested, and they were both confirmed to be an exact genetic match to one unknown male offender. So what that tells us is the same person who had left their seminal fluid on Melissa was the same one with Barbara. We were looking for one person.
This was the moment police knew they were looking for a serial killer. It was a major development that provided fresh hope that justice would be served and the killer caught. And yet, even with this new information, the investigation stalled. And for another 20 years, the case again went cold. I'm Nancy Hixt, a senior crime reporter for Global News. Today, on Crime Beat, I share the groundbreaking techniques that historical homicide detectives used nearly 50 years after the murders to finally reveal the shocking truth. It turned out there were more victims. This is part 2 of Uncovering a Serial Killer. As an adult, Anita Vukovic-Kohut has Googled her sister's name many times.
It was nagging at me. It always has been. It's always been at the back of my head. I looked it up on the internet over the years to see if there was any updates that maybe would come out.
Anita was only 2 months old when her sister, Eva Dvorak, was found dead, along with her best friend, Patsy McQueen.
My mom had 3 girls. Zsezsa, Martha, and Eva. Martha was the oldest, Eva was the middle, and Zsezsa was the youngest. And then, after their father passed, she met my dad. I came along. I'm definitely the timestamp of when it happened. I only know life after. So, growing up, you think sometimes there's family dysfunction, but now you just realize it was just coping mechanisms, right? I just remember Mom speaking about her, and Zsezsa and Martha would talk about some memories about just playing and having fun. Mom would always talk about how cute she was. She described her like a little cherub. She was loving. She had the biggest, warmest heart.
Growing up, Anita struggled with not knowing what caused her sister's death, which had been classified as undetermined. She knew Eva and Patsy had skipped class at their junior high school that day, and that they were caught drinking in the bathroom by their principal. She was told the girls took off to avoid their punishment, expulsion from school, and a likely grounding at home. Anita said over the years, she heard bits and pieces of what happened next.
As soon as they found out that they were missing, the family got together and looked for her over the whole weekend. They couldn't find her. Then they got the phone call on the Sunday morning.
Anita's family was never at peace with the explanation they were given about Eva and Patsy's deaths.
A couple of kids who were getting in trouble, got caught drinking at school, then went partying the whole weekend. I mean, they were 14, right? The whole time, the story was that nobody knew how they passed. And I think people suspected that maybe it was an accident and they were last seen at a party, so maybe everybody freaked out and kind of left the bodies somewhere. Like, I couldn't even comprehend what my mom went through until I became a mother. She probably carried the blame right until her last breath. I can't imagine the headspace she was in having a newborn. She just lost her husband. She just met this new guy, had a baby. Now she lost her daughter and she has to take care of a newborn. How she was able to get up every day.
That's what led to Anita's regular searches for information about her sister.
It was nagging at me. It always has been. It's always been at the back of my head. I looked up on the internet over the years to see if there was any updates that maybe would come out.
More than 40 years after Eva and Patsy died, in 2019, Anita decided to try and connect with Patsy's sister, Dee Hagen, through Facebook.
So I reached out to her and said, this is a long shot. I don't want to bring up any bad memories, but are you Patsy's sister? Because I'm Eva's sister. And it wasn't until 2022, so like 3 years later, that I got an answer. And in the meantime, I guess she was doing her own research on me to see if I was just some weirdo, or because they didn't know about me. That's how young I was, right? They didn't even know about me. So the way that it progressed was that it was in June of 2022 that we started talking through Facebook.
Not long after, Anita attended 2 unrelated true crime presentations made by a Calgary police homicide detective. At intermission, she approached the detective, who then put her in touch with the Calgary Police Cold Case Homicide Team, who then connected her with the RCMP Historical Homicide Unit, because Eva and Patsy's case was under their jurisdiction.
I spoke to an officer, and when I did talk to him, he was so kind and so understanding about everything, and he even said to me, I can't believe you're calling me right now, because we're looking into this right now. I don't know what the trigger was that got them to start looking into it, but when I asked about it, they had already begun the process.
The RCMP investigator told her that just 2 months earlier, they received a tip that spurred a review of Eva and Patsy's case. Here's Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie of the Alberta RCMP Serious Crimes Branch.
It certainly was investigated, but turned out to be a dead end. What it was is, as an inmate, Correctional Services of Canada had found Patsy's name written in the person's some paperwork that they had, so they passed it on, and we're like, yeah, we'll definitely investigate it. No, it turned out the person certainly was not responsible for her death, but actually, for our understanding, is did know her, or at least have know of her. But really what it did is the investigator, took that file, opened it up, and said, you know what? There are exhibits that we have not analyzed in several years that we can send these off, and maybe with the advances in technology, we're going to get a hit.
Eva and Patsy's loved ones had no idea exhibits even existed. They had never been told about any forensic evidence gathered in the case. Given that their deaths were not considered homicides, just undetermined, their families were baffled. At this point, they still weren't given any further detail, no information on what the exhibits were, only that they were being sent away for analysis. As a part of that testing, Eva and Patsy's siblings were contacted. Patsy's sister, Sandy Ask, remembers receiving a message on Facebook.
It just said that this is so-and-so from the RCMP, and we have reopened your sister's case, and that they had found something, but they wouldn't tell us what. and that they needed our DNA to test. I didn't believe that it was true, like after all these years.
Sandy immediately called her sister Dee.
I get a phone call from Sandy telling me this, and I was like, no way, somebody's playing a prank or doing something, because who would contact you on Facebook?
And then a call to each of their other siblings, including Laura Jacobson.
All of a sudden, you're calling us and telling us you guys might have something after all these years? I never in my lifetime thought I was ever going to find out what happened.
That was followed by messages back and forth with Eva's siblings, who said they had received the same request. Here again is Eva's youngest sister, Anita.
I was shocked. I was elated. I was so happy. The first thing that I did was I was texting Patsy's sister and saying they didn't forget.
In the spring of 2023, 47 years after Eva and Patsy's deaths, their families were brought together for a meeting at a rural RCMP detachment outside of Calgary.
Well, we just all met there, and we were put in a room, and there was the officers and the detectives there, and they told us that they needed our DNA swabbing and that they couldn't tell us much more details about it. And we were asking, do you have a suspect? Is there somebody involved? And they said, we can't tell you that at this time.
Patsy's sisters, Lorraine Kane and Laura Jacobson, said it was all very surreal.
So that each of them, there was 4 of them, and they took little groups of us all and swabbed us with their cotton and put it in a little baggie, because they said that the DNA for the girls was too old now.
The results of forensic testing would take months. In the meantime, the murders of Melissa Rehorick and Barbara McLean also had fresh eyes. 2 veteran Calgary police homicide detectives were working on the case. Detective Ken Carrier and Detective Nicole Schwidelski have been with CPS for about 25 years each.
In 2019, when I went to the historical homicide team, I just moved from the regular rotation in homicide. As I moved to the team itself, I spoke to the members that were there, and there were a number of files where DNA existed, but there was no resolution.
You'll recall that in 2003, the RCMP had submitted exhibits gathered from Melissa and Barbara's cases for forensic testing, and were able to confirm that they were sexually assaulted and killed by the same man. The problem was, police had no idea who that was, which is why these 2 Calgary police officers decided to take a look.
By 2018, of course, a year earlier, the Golden State Killer case had broke, and we knew that there was a way. What that way was, I was unaware at the time.
The Golden State Killer, also known as the original Night Stalker and the East Area Rapist, committed at least 13 murders and numerous rapes and burglaries between 1974 and 1986. His crime spree encompassed 87 victims and 53 crime scenes, spanning 11 California counties. He eluded capture for 40 years until investigators used a new form of DNA tracking, known as IgG, and it helped to unmask and arrest Joseph James DeAngelo in 2018. It's not new science. For years, it's been used to help people who were adopted to find their birth parents. But Detective Nicole Schwidelski says it's new to law enforcement.
Investigative genetic genealogy, or forensic investigative genetic genealogy, we call it IgG, or sometimes it's referred to as FIG, F-I-G-G. It's the use of genetic testing in combination with traditional genealogical research.
Detective Carrier attended a presentation that was put on by investigators who caught the Golden State Killer.
inspector at the time was Monty Sparrow. He subsequently sent a number of us on a course, really, to learn a bit about what they did in California in 2018, and really gave us the starting point as to, hey, we can introduce this back in Calgary. We have perpetrator DNA that is unknown. All reasonable leads have been taken in these investigations, and we're at an end point, rather than randomly selecting people to compare against that crime scene sample. It was time to take a more reasonable step, and that led us to IGG. IGG opens up opportunities because we're not looking for the offender in an IGG databank. What we're looking for is kinship, to hopefully give a hypothesis or a lead as to who that person may be.
By about mid-2020, out of our office, my partner and I had already used this technique to solve 2 of our cases. And so we began looking at other Calgary cases, and we found that there were a lot of Calgary victims who were dumped outside the city of Calgary limits. And those cases were RCMP files. And so we approached the RCMP in January of 2021, and we offered to conduct the IGG portion of their investigations to help them move these cases forward, because we felt that we had obligations to the Calgary victims.
Detective Schwedelsky says that's how the partnership with the RCMP began to look at the murders of Melissa Rehoric and Barbara McLean.
We take a crime scene sample, which really has to be attributable to the suspect in a particular case, or in some cases, an unidentified human remains case. And we take that DNA sample and we process it in a different way, typically at a private lab, and we create what's called a SNP profile. Single nucleotide polymorphism is kind of the long name of it. And we have that processed, and it's able to be uploaded into a genealogical database where we can then see genetic relative matches. And then we pursue those genetic relative matches by building trees and trying to follow the trees and identify who the DNA belongs to. So we, as in CPS, uploaded that profile to the genealogical databases, and we performed what we would call the traditional investigative genetic genealogy work in that case to develop a possible candidate for that DNA.
Detective Carrier says currently only 2 genetic genealogy sites permit law enforcement to compare suspect DNA with their databases. Those are GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA.
These public databases anyone could load into, including myself, yourself, your parents, your cousins, you name it. And people upload into these databases to expand their family tree. Really, they're curious, one, their ancestry, if they're Russian, if they're from Australia, or where they may be from. The second part of that is they'll receive information back from the database of other people that have uploaded to see if you're maybe share enough DNA with them that you could be considered a second cousin, a third cousin, a fourth cousin. And so it really expands the means by which your distant relatives, where they came from, who they are, and how you may be able to reach out and talk to them. These are 2 small genealogical databases in the grand scheme of things, for sure. It averages. We're comparing, when we put up a crime scene sample, we're looking at using probably 5 to 7% of the actual people that are uploaded to databases throughout the world. So the law enforcement can only use a very small part of those, compare against a very small part of that population. If we could compare to the entirety of people that actually upload their DNA, law enforcement would be changed forever, for sure.
Still, with just the 2 databanks providing information, police received a long list of names. Thousands of people who shared even the smallest amount of the killer's DNA. At Calgary Police Headquarters, cold case detectives worked with investigative genetic genealogists to build out family trees. It's fascinating work, but it's also a bit complicated. Detective Carrier and Detective Schwedelsky, along with one of their genealogists, guided me through a crash course. I'm going to share with you a lot of details behind how this all worked, but I'm still very much simplifying their techniques and the time it takes to put all of this together. They put in exhaustive work on this file, which ultimately created a tree with 6,400 people dating back to the 1700s.
They create a number of genetic networks, and at the convergence of at least two of those networks, they'll come up with a hypothesis as to a person or persons that we should be looking at as a potential suspect.
Genetic networks are groups of DNA matches that are both related to each other and the subject. They descend from one common ancestor. In this case, they developed a large US-based genetic network that started with a person born in 1732 and eventually narrowed it down to someone born in 1806. This all takes significant time because each line of the tree has to be researched along with their descendants. That ancestral couple from the early 1800s turned out to be the great-great-great-grandparents of 3 brothers. The 2 detectives worked to figure out which of these brothers could be the possible killer.
So once we had the options in relation to the different brothers, it became quite apparent which one we would prioritize based on his criminal history, which again was based on newspaper articles where he was charged with rape in different states. So based on that, we knew that he was last known to be in Idaho. We know that he would have given his DNA down in the Idaho state. So we did take the initial steps in order to ensure that his DNA did exist down there. And we worked with both the RCMP and the crime lab in order to ensure that there would be a match or a comparison done from Canada's National DNA Databank, where the profile existed, to that of Idaho State Lab or the federal lab in the United States. There's a process where it goes through Interpol and a comparison is made. Sometimes it's a lengthy process and sometimes it needs a bit of help, but that comparison did inevitably happen. The results came back to our crime lab and they passed on that it was indeed a match.
After 11 weeks of digging, they identified the man they believed was responsible for killing Melissa Rehoric and Barbara McLean.
And we identified Gary Swery on February 1st and provided that name to the RCMP on 2023.
They had identified a suspect, but the work was far from over. Here again is RCMP Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie.
Gary Allen Swery became the number one focus on our investigation of figuring out who he was and where he was from and what type of person he was.
Police learned Gary Swery was born in 1942 in Oak Park, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. He was the oldest of 3 siblings. In the mid-1950s, the Swery family moved to California.
He graduated high school. He was described as being charming, charismatic, good at drama. He was offered scholarships because apparently his IQ was incredibly high. It was said to be 160. However, he turned down these scholarships. He graduated high school, was almost immediately married, had 4 children, but struggled finding any type of meaningful employment, working jobs as a cook or reportedly as a salesman, but like a traveling salesman in the 60s and 70s.
As a young adult, in 1961, Swery got into crime. First, he was convicted of petty theft. But before long, his crimes took a darker turn. He became a prolific sex offender, using threats, violence, and drugs to overcome his victims.
We do know one time that our offender, when he was arrested in California, that he did have a substance called Seconal, actually hidden in his belt. So, from researching, Seconal, it is a sedative and could definitely be used if your victim consumes it, to take away their fight or flight response. Would it knock them out? I'm sure in high enough quantities it could put them in a huge sedative state.
I have both the charge and conviction information for Sweary's offenses in the 1960s and 70s in California. In 1965, Sweary was convicted of rape by force, sodomy, kidnapping, and assault to commit rape. In 1966, he grabbed a victim from behind and dragged her into an alley. He choked her and threatened to kill her. He had a gun and a knife. He forced her into the back seat of a car where he sexually assaulted her. He then drove around before stopping and ordering her to get out of the vehicle. In this case, Sweary was convicted of kidnapping and assault to commit rape and sex perversion. At that time, Gary Sweary was 23 years old. He was sent for a psychiatric evaluation and was classified as a mentally disordered sex offender in California. In 1969, he was incarcerated at San Quentin Prison, California's oldest correctional institution, and is now known as the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. Until just a few years ago, it was notorious for its death row, filled with high-profile serial killers that are too numerous to name, but include the Night Stalker, the Grim Sleeper, and Charles Ng, who fled to Canada but was later extradited and convicted of killing 11 people. Needless to say, San Quentin was a prison where some of California's most violent offenders were sent, and that included Gary Sweary. He was incarcerated there for 3 years before being released on parole. 2 years later, in 1974, he was arrested again and charged with rape by the LAPD. At that time, Gary Sweary was released on bail. When he didn't show up for his next court date, a warrant was issued for his arrest. That's when police believe Sweary fled to Canada.
We don't know what brought him to Calgary, although I think it's safe to say that he was going to face a significant jail sentence for committing those sexual assaults in the United States.
And that's when Gary Sweary's movements became a lot more difficult for police to track.
There's a couple of factors at play, and I think that it was very fortuitous for him to be living at that time, because in the 70s, it was very easy to come across the United States-Canada border. In some places, it was almost an open border, and even if there were border stations, sometimes they were unmanned at night, even after hours. So I think it was easy for him to come across the border, but also easy for him at that time to just go in and possibly say, I lost my ID or something along those lines. It was easy probably to obtain ID in another name at that time. And once he did that, he was off to the races with getting Social Security in that name and establishing an identity for himself in Canada.
That's Sergeant Mel Riopel. She's the commander of a task force created to try and dig up every possible detail about Sweary's history and movements.
K Ideology became a project and or task force, and that name is generated because K is our division, K Division, RCMP, which is Alberta, for the province of Alberta, and Ideology is a name that's generated by our Criminal Operations Division.
The team worked to track down any family, friends, and associates that could help them piece together a timeline.
We know that he used at least 10 or 11 aliases that we are aware of. We feel that there's likely been more, but the ones that we identified through our investigation and from what friends and family and ex-partners have told us about, we've gathered at least 10. He's used Gary Allen Sweary, he's used Gary Allen Spreary, he's used James Moreau, he's used Rex Edward Long, and he's used variations of those names as well. He's used the last name Blackman, we believe, or Blackmen or Blackman.
In addition to the fake names, Gary Sreri was able to transform himself into whoever he felt he needed to be to remain free while preying on innocent victims.
He's been described by some friends and family as a chameleon. He was able to alter his looks. He had beard, no beard, sometimes a mustache, long hair, short hair. So he changed his appearance quite a bit over the course of several years. And with changing his name, his appearance, he changed his vehicles, he was able to change his job because he worked at transient jobs. So we feel that has helped him commit these crimes.
As the task force continued to trace Sreri's movements, investigators received results of forensic testing of exhibits from Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen's case. In the spring of 2024, the RCMP called a special meeting with their surviving loved ones. They gathered at a small rural RCMP detachment in Cochrane, about a 30-minute drive west of Calgary. Those who couldn't be there in person were connected via a video link. There was secrecy leading up to the meeting, and the families told me they were nervous going in. Nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to learn. Eva Dvorak's youngest sister, Anita, said she's still working through the trauma of that day.
I mean, you could hear a pin drop in that place with 20 of us in the room, including the detectives and counselors. It was just a shock. And then it was a shock to find out then not only how they died, but how brutal it was. I don't even know how to explain it outside of it being almost like an out-of-body experience where you're just so shocked that you could just observe. I don't even know how to explain it properly.
RCMP Sergeant Travis McKenzie said the forensic testing of evidence led to a break in the case. It was no longer considered an undetermined death. RCMP confirmed Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen had been murdered.
We were able to actually show that the same seminal fluid that was found on Eva and Patsy were linked to two other homicides that happened in the area later on in 1776 and early 1977.
You heard that right. Investigators had found semen on the bodies of the girls, but had hidden that fact from everyone, including the families, for decades. Police said they couldn't share these details from the crime scene investigation earlier because they needed to protect the integrity of the investigation.
I know a lot of times, we use the term hold back information, where it's a technique where to properly investigate a crime, whether it's a homicide or almost any type of crime, we can't release all of the details. We'll intentionally hold back details from family and friends and the public that only the offender would know. So only the police would know and only the offender would know that seminal fluid was present. So them choosing not to give that to the family would not surprise me, because even in the 1970s, they were starting to become aware of this holdback technique.
The new information was a lot for the two families to wrap their heads around. You'll recall that for nearly 50 years, they had been told the girls had likely overdosed. Until the spring of 2024, Eva and Patsy's siblings had no idea there were bodily fluids found on their clothing. Now, they learned not only had they been murdered, but they had also been sexually assaulted. And that wasn't all. Investigators told Eva and Patsy's families that DNA confirmed that Eva and Patsy had been killed by the same man who killed Melissa Rehorick and Barbara McLean, serial killer Gary Sreri. Patsy's sisters, Dee and Sandy, said their jaws dropped in disbelief.
We were in shock because when they said they were sexually abused or there was semen on their clothing, it was we didn't know any of that.
That's something you never thought you'd hear. That was the furthest thing from my thoughts, is that they were sexually assaulted and strangled.
Especially when they used the word serial killer and then proceeded to tell us about the other 2 women that were involved. We had no idea.
Only then did it make sense why the RCMP had recently sent forensic evidence from their case off for analysis, years after the initial investigation.
I just can't believe how he could go under the radar all the time and move from here to there. And I'm sure that there's going to be more cases come up.
With 4 murders tied to Gary Sreri through DNA evidence, could he be responsible for more?
Well, I'd say this guy's a classic sexual predator, and having the psychopathy level along with the sexual deviance, I call that a very nasty cocktail.
The profile of a killer, along with exclusive interviews from the people who knew him best.
He called me and said, he called me every name in the book and threatened and said he was going to burn my apartment down with me and the kids in it. And I said, that's crazy. And then I said, stay away from me. And I hung up.
Unfortunately, the human condition isn't perfect. And there are some really bad people out there. My biological father was definitely one of them. I can't help but keep thinking, even to this day, how many do we not know about?
That's next time on Crime Beat. Crime Beat is written and produced by me, Nancy Hixt, with senior producer Dila Velasquez. Audio editing and sound design is by Rob Johnston. Special thanks to photographer-editor Danny Lantella for his work on this episode. Thanks to Jesse Weisner, our Crime Beat production assistant, and thanks to Chris Bassett, the VP of Network Content, Production, and Distribution, and Editorial Standards for Global News. I would love to have you tell a friend about this podcast. There are 6 seasons of stories you can listen to and share. And please consider rating and reviewing Crime Beat on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can find me on Facebook at Nancy Hixt Crime Beat and on Instagram at nancy.hixt. Thanks again for listening. Please join me next time.